Well, Calgary has the Stampede. Edmonton has K Days. For Toronto, it's the X. And in Vancouver, the yearly summer celebration is known simply as the PNE. And few people know it quite as well as my next guest. Here to talk about East Side Story, growing up at the PNE as writer, comedian, elementary school teacher, and now first-time author, Nick Marino. Welcome. Full disclosure, Nick, I spent one summer, the one between grade 10 and grade 11, working at Playland. You spent a total of 6 years at the PNE. What was it like growing up in what was essentially the playground of East Van?
Well, it was my first job at 12 years old, so it was kind of eye-opening to be not quite a teenager and be thrown into working at the PNE, seeing all different kind of things going on. It's an exciting place to be just as a kid, and then as my first job, it was great. Like you say, I worked there for 6 years. I didn't grow up right in the neighborhood. My cousins did, and I often spent time at their place, so I was as near it. But yeah, it was a great place. It was like I say, eye-opening, a lot of different scamming going on and that kind of stuff. So there was a lot of fun things for me to write about.
Now, it wasn't just Playland at the PNE. It was also the Pacific Coliseum and Empire Stadium, too. It seems like the northeast corner of Vancouver was the place to be in those days. Did it feel that way to you as a kid?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, my family, we were big Whitecaps fans at the perfect time because they won the Soccer Bowl in 1979. So we had season tickets. So, going down to Hastings Park or where the PNE is was always super exciting. And any concerts I ever went to, big concerts, were always at the Coliseum. The BC Lions played there, the Canucks played at the Coliseum. So everything that was happening in the city seemed to be happening, like you say, in the northeast corner of the city.
Now, people talk about the way the city changed with Expo 86. You can almost draw a dividing line before Expo and after Expo. But you talk about a change in East Vancouver in particular once the BC Lions and about a decade and a bit later, the Vancouver Canucks left for downtown. How do you think East Van changed after that?
Well, it became less of a cultural hub. There wasn't reasons for people outside of East Vancouver to be going into that area quite as much. So I'm sure restaurants and things that were around the PNE weren't as busy. Like I worked for a while as a waiter at the Sirloiner right across the street from the Coliseum, and that place was packed whenever there was a hockey game, whenever there was races at the track. But once everything moved away, like I say, I think the people that were in that area were more likely just East Van people. And then that's when we also saw the change where part of the PNE became green space again, became a park. So I think that had all those teams not moved, I wonder if that would have happened.
Now, in a sense, I guess the book is about you growing up, but also about the city growing up in that time as well. Fair to say?
For sure, yeah. I thought it was a nice parallel that the year that I turned 19 was 86, and it was sort of like the year that the city sort of came of age. I remember a lot at the time there was a lot of talk about Vancouver being a world-class city, and there seemed like people really wanted that so badly. And I tried to parallel that in the book with me wanting to be a teenager and live in that teen world. I was the youngest in my family, youngest of my cousins and all that. So I was always looking up to them. And I felt like Vancouver in the same way was looking up to cities that got a lot more press and that kind of thing. So yeah, it definitely is a coming of age story of both the city and for me.
Now, the book very much your story, but you also fill it with rich characters, from the security guard at Playland to some prominent Vancouverites as well. Was there a list of folks you thought, I have to get into this book?
Well, I definitely wanted to get Bob Lenarduzzi and Louis Pasaglia, being two guys that grew up like half a block from the PNE, and in Louis' case, spending like almost his whole every team he played on, he played at Empire Stadium, from when he was at Notre Dame to SFU to the Lions. So I thought those guys would be great to have in it. I did interview Cliff Ronning. Unfortunately, I somehow deleted his recording, and I was too embarrassed to call him back. So his story's not in here, but he would have been the third of the sort of important Vancouver athletes, I think, that played for a hometown team. And I also wanted to interview Mike Reno of Loverboy. And I got close, but they never quite said yes, or we could never make it work. But I thought him being a local guy that ended up playing at those huge Empire Stadium shows would have been fun to hear. I know he's not like technically from Vancouver, but I believe he lives here now.
Now, you're not afraid to touch upon some of the less comfortable aspects of the PNE story, namely how the fairgrounds were used to gather up Japanese Canadians and their belongings to prepare them for internment. How important was it for you to include this in the book?
Well, it was essential really because I feel like it would be disrespectful to the memory of what happened to all of those Japanese Canadians at the time to just write a story about a place that was fun. Because it is also the site of one of the worst things that's happened in BC history with all those people going through there. Now, people starting in 1942, I think in March of 1942, they started being interned or incarcerated there. And some of them were held for a few weeks, some were for months, but the conditions were deplorable. And it's something like I grew up in Vancouver. I went to school in Vancouver. I never really heard that much about it. It was almost like, well, this had to happen. That's the way I felt like it was taught. Once I was researching it, it seemed like, first of all, it didn't have to happen. The Army and the RCMP both said that it was not necessary. But also, I didn't realize the degree to the sort of degradation of these people, where they were living in horse barns. There was 1,500 women and 10 showers, a lot of really horrible conditions. And on top of that, they kept Happy Land, which was the precursor to Playland, open at the same time. So these Japanese Canadians could be looking through the fence at people going on the roller coaster, going to the Happy Land dance hall. So because of that, and being a teacher, that's one of the things I cover in the curriculum is what happened with the Japanese internment and incarceration. So it seemed very important to me to have it on in the book.
Fair to say this book isn't about nostalgia, strictly speaking. You're not out to make East Van great again, as it were, to borrow a phrase, but you'd argue that a lot has changed for the better in many ways since those years. How so?
Well, I think as a society, we're becoming more progressive all the time and more accepting. If I think back to the days when I was working at the PNE, Vancouver was, a pretty homophobic city. We were living in a time, I think the AIDS crisis was probably in full swing then, and there was a lot of marginalization of people, definitely in the LGBTQ community. And also, I feel like we've become just more inclusive in general. I mean, I look back on my childhood fondly and I had a great time, but I also am able to put it into perspective that there were some people that weren't being treated as equals at that time. So that's why I think it's always improving for sure.
Now, the book seems to be a celebration of working and middle class East Vancouver as much as it is of the PNE itself. Was that the goal?
It was kind of the goal. I mean, sometimes when I was writing this, I wasn't exactly sure what all the goals were, but as I was writing it, I was thinking, some of these voices that I'm including, like you say, working class East Vancouver, they're not traditional voices that are recorded for history. So it's nice to have some of those voices in it. Like before, I remember I read a book about it was what life was like for just middle class or just regular people in ancient Rome. And it was kind of interesting to read about just the average guy. So I thought in this book, it'd be nice to have just sort of like what were the average Joes up to.
The book is well timed, coming out the same month as another PNE gets underway, the 65th anniversary of the wooden roller coaster. What do you hope folks get out of the book?
Oh, well, I hope they enjoy it. I hope that they can, like, in no way do I see this as a definitive story of the PNE. It's just my story. There's a million different stories that could have been told about the PNE, but I hope people get a sense of what it was like at that time. I hope I paint a picture of what it was like in the early 80s, and also just an overall feeling of fair life, like what goes on at a fair. Because it's a little bit different than the real world. The rules are slightly different, things are slightly exaggerated. I'm not saying my stories are, I'm just saying life inside a fair is an exaggerated version of real life, I think.
And what do you think your younger self would think of this book?
I think I would like it, to be honest, because there's something in here. I wrote an apology letter to a teacher when I was in grade 12, I think, and I still had a copy of it, and I included it in the book. And I think it's one of the stronger parts of the book. I think it's funny. So I think my younger self would be proud that this got done, and I think I probably would have liked it. Yeah.
The name of the book is East Side Story Growing Up at the PNE. It's available from Robin's Egg Books, an imprint of Arsenal Pulp Press. My thanks to author Nick Marino.
Thanks a lot, John.